Hey home athletes, it is time to talk about midpoints. All right, so what the heck is a midpoint? Well, in the context we're talking about, a midpoint is just a point that, if you're talking about a segment, it's the point right in the middle that will divide the segment into exactly two equal pieces. So let's go ahead and jot that down, right? A midpoint is the point that divides a segment into two pieces with equal lengths. Now in geometry, we would say that the resulting segments would be considered congruent. It's the same thing, really. When we're talking about anything that has equal measure, we can call that congruent. All right, so let's say we have a segment, and this segment has an endpoint x1, y1, and x2, y2. We want to know what the coordinates are of the midpoint. So we can take a look at this and say, well, how would I find exactly right in the middle of x1 and x2? And how would I find exactly right in the middle of y1, y2? And you probably know that we would just want to average those things, right? So we can take x1 and x2, and we can say that, so what's going to be right in the middle here is going to be x1 plus x2 all divided by 2. We're just averaging these two x values, okay? And then we would do the same thing, okay, and that's going to give us that. And then, so we're going to do the same thing here and find right in the middle of the y values. y1 plus y2 divided by 2 is going to give us right in the middle of the y's, okay? And that's going to give us this. So that means that we can find the coordinates of a midpoint by just taking the average of the x's and average of the y's. And that's what we get here. So this is actually considered the midpoint formula. All you have to do is remember that you're averaging the x's and averaging the y's. So let's look at some examples of problems where we use the midpoint formula. Okay. Let's say I have a segment, and the segment has endpoints P1 and P2. P1 has the coordinate -5, -3, and P2 has the coordinate of 11, 7. We want to find the midpoint of this segment. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take the x values and average them. Okay, so we're just going to take the x values here, -5 and 11, and average them. And likewise with the y values, -3 and 7, and average those, -3. All right, so now let's simplify things. Okay. So when we clean up the numerator, we have -5 plus 11 is 6 divided by 2, and -3 plus 7 is 4 divided by 2. Then we would just clean that up and say that's the coordinate 3, 2. So the coordinate 3, 2 would be right smack dab in the middle of P1 and P2. All right, so that was fairly easy. We had some really nice numbers to work with. They're not always so nice. So let's try something that looks like this. This time, same scenario. I have a segment with endpoints P1 and P2, and I want to find the midpoint. I'm going to do precisely the same thing. It's just a little uglier, okay? All right, so I'm just going to take my x values, -9 square root of 2 plus -6 square root of 2, and add them together, divide by 2. And I'll do the same thing with my y values. 4 square root of 7, 9 square root of 7, add them together, divide by 2. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to do here is clean it up a little bit. Notice that these are like terms. I can combine them into a single term, so that's going to be -15 square root of 2 over 2. And over here, I've got 4 square root of 7 plus 9 square root of 7. I can also combine those. It's ugly. I'd have to really kind of find out what that is approximately to plot it, but that would be the coordinates of the midpoint. Let's look at a couple more examples. This time I'm given one of my endpoints, a midpoint, and I want to find my second endpoint. Okay, so we've got to kind of use a little bit of logic here. There's a couple of different ways to do this, okay? And I'm going to show you the algebraic way first, and then I'm going to show you how to do it logically, right? All right, so algebraically, we're going to use that midpoint formula. We know that to find the midpoint, we're going to average the x's and average the y's, right? So let's think about my midpoint here is -2. So to get that, I'm going to have to average this plus my second x value, okay? And so I want to actually solve for this x value. So you're going to use your math algebra skills. You're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 2, and we'd say that's -4 is equal to 5 plus x. And then I can subtract the 5 to the other side and say x is equal to -9. I'm going to do the same thing for my y coordinate over here, all right? So I've got, let's see, my midpoint y is 4, and that's going to equal, so 8 plus y divided by 2. So now multiply both sides by 2. You're going to end up with 8 here is equal to 8 plus y. Subtract 8 from both sides, and here we get y is equal to 0. So my second endpoint is going to be -9, 0. Okay, so that's the algebraic way. So let's think about this in a really logical way that requires no algebra. Let's say I know I'm going on a hike, and I know that when I have gone 200 steps, I'm halfway to my destination. How many more steps do I need to take then? Hopefully you said 200 more, because if I have gone 200 to get halfway there, I'm going to have to go another 200 to get all the way there. Okay, so we can kind of use that mindset with these values. I have started at one endpoint and I've gone to the midpoint. So if I'm looking at my x values, if I start at 5 and I go to -2, that's really subtracting 7, right? Okay, so now to get to my other endpoint, I've got to do that again. So I'm going to subtract 7 from this -2. That's going to get me -9. Okay, same thing for my y's. If I start here at 8 and I go halfway and I'm at 4, I've subtracted 4. So to go all the way there, I'm going to have to subtract 4 one more time, and I'm going to end up at 0. Either way works, okay? So you can do this logically, algebraically. Either way, you're going to get the same answer. All right, let's look at these two graphs, and then we will move on to the distance formula. All right, let's take a look at this graph. In this graph, we are given a segment, and it doesn't say it, but what we want to do is find the midpoint, okay? So we want to find the coordinates of the midpoint of this segment. This is very much like the very first thing we did, except that the coordinates of the endpoints are not explicitly given to us. So we need to look at the graph and say, oh, the coordinate of this endpoint here is -3, 1. And the coordinate of this endpoint here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, -2. Now, once I've got those coordinates, I can go ahead and use my midpoint formula and just average the x's and average. So why don't you give it a shot on your own? Stop the video, pause it, give it a shot, and then restart the video. Okay, so hopefully this is what you did. You averaged the x's, -3 plus 6, divide by 2, and got 3 halves. You averaged the y's, 1 plus -2, divided by 2, and got -1/2, and that would be the coordinate of your midpoint. Did you get it? I hope so. Okay, this time I'm given an endpoint and a midpoint, and I want to find the coordinate of the other endpoint. So this is going to be the same thing as what we did before, all right? You want to do it algebraically, or you want to do it logically? You want to do one of each? Okay, so let's do the first one with logic. Endpoint to midpoint. I'm going from -3 to +2. What did you have to do to get there? You had to add 5, okay? So I need to add 5 one more time. From -3 plus 5 is 2. 2 plus 5 is 7, okay? And then I'm going to do the same thing for my y value. -2 to 4/3, that one's a little bit harder, okay? And so you're probably going to need some common denominators or a really good calculator. So maybe we try this one with the algebra. That may be easier in this one. So my y value, my midpoint is 4/3. That's going to be -2 plus y over 2. All right. So again, multiply both sides by 2 to get rid of that denominator. We have 8/3 is equal to -2 plus y. So y is going to equal 8/3 plus 2. And that's the same as 6/3. And so we end up with a y value of 14/3. Okay, stay tuned because next time we're going to talk about the distance formula. I'll see you then.